typically don't refinish furniture for other people, but when my clients sent me pictures of these Broyhill Brasilia pair of nightstands, which is typically pretty rare, I just knew that I had to save them and refinish the tops. I'll try to take you through the process of how I refinish these. I like to start every piece by giving it a good clean. Typically I use naphtha and 4-0 steel wool, so it's super fine. You can just pour it onto your steel wool, give it a good scrub down, and then it removes all the dirt and oils and grimes that have built up over time. Once you've finished cleaning, the next step is to give it a good sand down. I was just finishing the tops of these, so I started with a 150 grit. I skipped the stripping part on this because the lacquer was so worn and old that I didn't even need to use it. So I just jumped straight in with the sanding, and the whole top was sanded really quickly. You can see the difference here between the sanded area and then where the old finish was. I sanded the finish off with 150 and then sanded with 220. And here I am just wiping the piece down with naphtha so you can see what the wood grain looks like once you've taken all the finish off. Next up, I am fixing some areas where there's missing veneer. I like to tape off all around the areas just so you have a really clean edge before I put on the epoxy. I'm using Mohawk epoxy here that's already pre-colored. So it's super easy to use. Cut off a little bit, roll it up. There's not a whole lot of working time, so you have to be pretty quick, but you need to mix thoroughly the dark colored parts and the light colored parts, which is the activator in the middle, and then apply it, push it really hard into the wood so that it's going to fill all of the gaps. Filling all of the small holes with epoxy and then letting them dry. The nightstands are now ready to have the tops stained. I use this walnut wood wiping stain by Mohawk, and it gives a really great color. You need to make sure that you mix the can thoroughly beforehand, and then you simply just paint it on, wipe it on with a rag, and then wipe it straight off. Once the stain has dried, you want to seal it with Easy Vinyl Sealer. Once the wood is sealed, I then add the glazing. The glaze gets down into the wood grain and fills it in and just makes it look a whole lot richer, darker color. Glaze has a thick consistency, so I wipe it on with a 3M Scotch pad. You can also use foam brushes, regular paint brushes, or even any kind of rag. And the aim is to coat the surface and then let it dry or frost, typically for about 20 minutes or so. You can see here, once the glaze has dried, it goes a little frosty, kind of like donut glazing. Once dry, you just wipe it off with a soft cloth. Go in one direction and then just wipe off all of the glaze so that the piece is then dry again. Here's what it looks like once we've finished with the glaze. Now back to that missing piece of veneer. I've taped it off mostly because when you sand the epoxy back down once it's dried, you just don't want to sand off too much of the finish from the surrounding wood areas. So covering it with some green tape really helps that process. My aim here is to sand down the epoxy finish so that it is flush with the wood as possible. I'm using 400 grit sandpaper here just to get it super flush after I've removed that tape. Now that the fix is all flush, I'm going to try to blend the colour. I didn't tape all of this, but I do use Mohawk Blendle sticks. They're kind of like little crayons that you can put on and colour, and then I do this in multiple layers so that it blends in. The final step is sealing all of the wood with a top lacquer. Just spray it on, long sweeping movements to get an even surface. And here is how they turned out. I do a final coat all over the piece with Oz Cream Polish just to make the wood restored and moist and look great again. And these look basically new. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and please subscribe.